On a wind-brittle evening in January 1978, the Kowalski house on the edge of Cleveland, Ohio, felt like every other working family's refuge from winter steam fogging the kitchen window, a pot of cabbage soup ticking softly on the stove, snow melt dripping from boots lined up like tired soldiers by the back door. The dining table was crowded with the simple geometry of normal life. Chipped plates, a half-empty bottle of ketchup, a folded newspaper Daniel hadn't finished, and the kind of quiet that only arrives when a family has survived the day and wants nothing from the world except warmth. Daniel Kowalski wasn't trained for danger. He was a maintenance supervisor at a packaging plant, the man people called when a conveyor belt screamed or a boiler refused to cooperate. His hands knew wrenches and time cards, not weapons. Across from him, his wife, Marianne, broke bread with a careful calm that came from balancing a household budget down to the last dollar. Their son, Eddie, 11 years old and too observant for his own good, pushed peas around his plate while listening to the adults the way kids listen when they're trying to decide if the world is safe. Their little girl, Lena, hummed quietly. The overhead light gave a steady yellow glow until it didn't. The house dropped into darkness so cleanly it felt intentional, like someone had flipped a switch with a plan rather than a mistake. For a single minute, the room became pure outline. The window's pale rectangle, the black cutout of the refrigerator. Marianne's face turned toward Daniel, as if she expected him to explain the universe. Somewhere down the street, nothing changed. No distant chorus of neighbors reacting. No second-by-second cascade of porch lights dying. Just their house, swallowed. In the silence, Eddie's chair creaked as he shifted. Then, in the dark, the telephone rang. Only once. A lone chime that stopped before it could become a call, before Daniel could even reach for it, less like someone trying to speak, more like someone checking whether the line still led to this kitchen. The lights snapped back on. The radio on the counter, left low out of habit, returned mid-song as if nothing had happened, and the soup resumed its quiet simmer, and the moment tried to pass itself off as a glitch in the grid. Daniel stared at the ceiling fixture, jaw tightening, already rehearsing the mundane explanations. Marianne didn't touch her food. She didn't ask a question. She just watched him the way you watch a door after you hear something brush against it. Daniel forced a laugh that sounded wrong in his own ears. Eddie swallowed, then spoke with the flat seriousness of a child reporting something he doesn't yet have language for. "Dad," he said, eyes fixed on the table. "Today, after school, there was a man by the gate. He wasn't a dad. He didn't pick anyone up. He just stood there and watched me the whole time, as a Cuban." Daniel felt the warmth drain out of the room, in a way the electricity couldn't explain. He wanted to tell his son it was nothing, someone waiting for a ride, someone lost, someone harmless, but the single-ring phone still echoed in his head like a metronome counting down. He looked at Marianne again, and saw, in the smallest tightening around her mouth, the same thought he was trying not to have. This wasn't a neighborhood problem. This was a test, and someone, somewhere, had just measured how fast a normal family noticed. The next morning, Daniel tried to file the blackout and the one-ring call under winter glitches, the kind of nonsense a tired mind turns into omen. At the plant, he kept his hands busy and his thoughts locked down. He didn't tell anyone. Saying it out loud would make it real, and if it was real, it meant someone had reached into his house without breaking a window. When he pulled into the driveway that evening, the mailbox flag sat halfway raised, neither up nor down, like a paused signal. He lowered it and felt stupid for noticing. Then walked inside and found Marianne rinsing dishes that were already clean. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said too fast. Later, the phone rang again, one sharp ring, then silence. Daniel lifted the receiver on instinct and heard only sterile quiet. Not a person breathing, not a misdial linger, just absence. Marianne appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. Daniel set the receiver down slowly. Marianne stared at the phone as if it had teeth. Over the next days, coincidences stacked too neatly to ignore. A florist delivered a bouquet, with a card addressed to Marina, not Marianne, apologizing for last week, as if there was a story Daniel had never heard. Marianne held the flowers like they were contaminated and threw them out without smelling them. 2 nights later, as she carried the trash to the curb, a sedan rolled past at walking speed. Headlights off for a beat, then on again. It didn't stop. It didn't look. That was the point. It wasn't searching. It was confirming. On Thursday, Daniel found a note tucked under his windshield wiper. Sorry for the scratch. The car wasn't scratched. He ran his palm over the paint anyway, because the note wasn't about damage, it was about reflex. Would he check? Would he tell someone? Would he begin doubting his own senses? That evening, Eddie came home quieter than usual. When Daniel pressed, the boy's voice dropped to a whisper, like saying it might summon the man. He was there again, Eddie said, near the school gate. Just watching. Like he wanted me to notice. I'd go. Daniel's first instinct was noise. March into the principal's office, call the police, demand a name. His second instinct was worse. Do nothing, because doing nothing felt safer than being wrong. But safe was slipping away in inches. After the kids were asleep, Daniel found Marianne at the kitchen table with the phone book open. Not reading, waiting. When he asked what was going on, she shook her head once. I don't know, she said, eyes flicking to the dark window. But I think they're trying to put us somewhere, like pieces. Who's they? Marianne swallowed. People who don't want to threaten you, she said carefully, because threats make noise. They want you to move yourself. Friday came with a bright, brittle cold that made everything look sharper than it was. Street signs, mailbox numbers, the edges of ordinary life. Daniel drove Eddie to school himself instead of letting him walk the last block, telling the boy it was just because. Eddie didn't argue. Kids could sense when adults were lying to protect them. Outside the elementary school, Daniel saw the man. Not dramatic, not trench coat, not hat brim, not a silhouette out of a movie, just a clean-cut figure in a tan overcoat standing near the chain-link fence, hands in his pockets, posture loose enough to look casual. He wasn't staring at the kids. He was staring at the flow, the small currents of parents, teachers, buses, and doors opening and closing. When Daniel's car slowed at the curb, the man's gaze slid over the windshield in a single practice sweep and moved on. As if Daniel hadn't mattered. That lack of interest was the first real punch to the gut. Because if the man wasn't watching Eddie the way a predator watches prey, Daniel walked Eddie to the front doors anyway, forcing himself not to look back. He waited until Eddie vanished down the hallway, then stood at the curb with other parents pretending to chat while his mind ran in circles. If I confront him, I make myself visible. If I call the police, I might be calling into the same fog. He hated that thought most of all, that in this world, even help could be part of the trap. He drove to work, with his knuckles white on the steering wheel. At noon, Marianne called him from home. Voice tight, but controlled. Someone phoned, she said. Did you answer? One ring, she replied. Then nothing. Right after, there was a knock at the door. Daniel felt his stomach drop. I didn't open it, Marianne said. But I looked through the side curtain. It was a man holding a clipboard, like a utility worker. No logo, no truck. How long? Long enough for me to understand he wasn't waiting for me to come out, she said. Daniel closed his eyes in the break room. hearing the hum of vending machines like distant static. Did he leave? Eventually, Marianne said. But before he did, he put something on the step. A note? A photograph, she whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. Of what? Me, Marianne said, and her voice almost cracked on the word. In the grocery parking lot yesterday, I didn't see anyone. But it's close. Close enough to see the pattern on my coat. Silence swelled between them. Heavy and deliberate. They're telling us they can touch us whenever they want. Yes, Marianne replied, and they're telling us not to scream. Well, Caven, that night, after the kids went to bed, Daniel checked every lock twice, then stood in the hallway with the lights off, staring at the front door as if he could will it to stay shut. Marianne sat at the table, both hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from. We should go to the police, he said, though the words sounded thin. Marianne didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, it wasn't a refusal. It was something colder. If we guess wrong, she said quietly. Daniel felt the air turn to ice in his lungs. Our kids, he whispered. Marianne nodded once, and in that single motion, Daniel understood the true shape of the trap. It wasn't built to kill them. It was built to make them obey. Thursday arrived like a deadline, pretending to be a day. Daniel didn't sleep the night before. He lay in the dark, listening to the house, settle pipes ticking, the refrigerator clicking on, the faint groan of winter wind against the siding, and each sound felt like it might be a signal wearing the costume of normal. By morning, he'd already made coffee twice and forgotten to drink it. Marianne moved through the kitchen with an unnerving calm, packing lunches, checking homework, touching Eddie's shoulder a fraction longer than usual, as if memorizing the weight of him. At 3:17 p.m., the phone rang. Daniel stared at it until it stopped. One ring. Always one ring. A minute later, Marianne opened the mailbox and froze. She didn't call out. She just stood there, back rigid, as if the cold metal had burned her hand. Daniel stepped onto the porch. What is it? She held up a small envelope with no stamp, no return address, only their last name printed in block letters that looked like they'd been traced, not written. Thursday. Ice rink. 12 minutes. Leave. No threat. Marianne read it twice, then a third time, as if the words might rearrange into something less insane. They want us. There, she said. They want us to be seen. Daniel replied, and hated how certain he sounded, because he could already imagine it. Families lining up for hot chocolate, kids slipping on rental skates, a normal winter evening, and in the middle of it, a brush pass so clean no one would register it. Someone bumping shoulders, a paper bag traded for another, a scarf adjusted too close to a coat pocket. If anyone ever asked questions later, the answer would be simple. We were at the rink. We were with our children. We saw nothing. A perfect alibi that walked on two legs and held little hands. Marianne's face tightened. We can't take the kids into this. We can't not take them, Daniel said, and felt sick as the words landed. That's why it works. He tried to think like a normal man, with a normal life. Normal men called the police. Normal men yelled. Normal men believed the world had rules, but the last week had taught him a new physics. The people doing this didn't need to harm you, to control you. They only needed to convince you they could. At 5:30, Eddie asked if they were still going to the rink, like they'd promised sometime this winter. The boy's hope was bright and simple, a knife in Daniel's chest. Marianne smiled too quickly. Maybe, she said, and Daniel heard the fracture under the word. At 6:12, as they were putting on coats, Daniel noticed something on the living room floor near the baseboard. A single red thread, too bright to belong to any of their clothes, lying there like it had been placed rather than dropped. He stared at it, and a thought slid into his mind with the cold certainty of a locked door. They're not asking, they're measuring. Measuring how fast you move. Measuring whether you comply. Measuring whether your fear is loud enough to be useful. Marianne stepped beside him, followed his gaze, and whispered, "If we go, we become part of it. And if we don't—" The clock ticked towards 6:40, and the house, his safe, boring, ordinary house, felt like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of man he would become. Daniel drove them anyway, but not toward the rink. He backed out of the driveway slow, almost ceremonially, as if the street itself might be watching for the exact angle of his tires. Marianne sat rigid in the passenger seat, gloved hands locked together in her lap. Eddie and Claire were bundled in the back, sleepy and excited in that way kids get when you promise them something fun at night. Their voices soft and careless, unaware they were being weighed like coins. At the first intersection, Daniel signaled right. Then, at the last second, he went left. No dramatic swerve, no panic. Just a clean, ordinary decision, made with a steadiness he didn't feel. He kept his speed exactly legal. He let a minivan merge. He stopped fully at the sign. He forced his body to behave like a man doing nothing wrong, because the only weapon he had left was refusing to look hunted. The downtown lights rose ahead, brighter than their neighborhood, brighter than the rink's parking lot would ever be. A big hotel near the river, busy, warm, glass lobby, revolving doors, a front desk that never slept. People who notice things because noticing was their job. Marianne turned to him, voice thin. "Putting us somewhere they can't erase," he said. Her eyes flashed. "They'll follow. It's Mackett. Let them," Daniel murmured, and hated that his voice sounded like someone else's. "If they want a quiet war, we're making noise." He didn't call it the FBI. He didn't call it spies. He didn't even know who would believe him if he tried. He'd thought about dialing 911 a dozen times, then pictured Eddie at school tomorrow, walking through a hallway where any adult could be anybody. He needed a door that stayed open. As they crossed the bridge, he saw headlights settle into the lane behind them. 2 cars, back at first, then 1, then riding the same turns, the same pauses, like a shadow that knew his route better than he did. Daniel didn't look at Marianne. He didn't look in the rearview mirror for longer than a heartbeat. He kept the wheel straight. The sedan stayed. At the hotel entrance, he pulled into the circle drive as if they were checking in. Valets in red coats moved like chess pieces. A bellman held a door for a laughing couple. Warm light spilled out onto the sidewalk, turning the winter air into something almost gentle. Daniel parked where the cameras could see him. He stepped out first. Slow, casual, opened the back door, lifted Claire like a father, bringing his daughter into a lobby because she'd fallen asleep. Eddie hopped out and looked up at the building. Inside, the lobby smelled like polished wood and coffee. People talked. Phones rang. Luggage wheels hissed across marble. Daniel walked straight to the front desk and leaned in, as though asking about room rates. Then he said, quietly, with every syllable chosen like it might be used against him later. The clerk's smile held for half a second, then faltered when he saw Daniel's face. Marianne stood behind him, still holding the envelope in her coat pocket like it was radioactive. Eddie tugged at her sleeve, asking about the Christmas tree in the corner, and she answered him with a voice that wasn't hers. Outside the glass doors, the sedan rolled past once. Slow, too slow, and Daniel understood the trap hadn't been avoided. It had simply been moved to a place where witnesses had names. The hotel's security manager arrived with the measured calm of a man trained to keep panic from spreading, but his eyes sharpened The moment Daniel repeated the word family, he didn't ask for a story first, he asked for positions. "Stay here," he told Daniel, nodding toward a seating area visible from the desk and the doors. "Don't move to a hallway. Don't go outside. Keep your kids in sight." Daniel slid into the chair like he was obeying a fire drill. Marianne sat beside him, rigid, her coat still on, the envelope still pressing against her ribs. Eddie climbed onto the cushion and stared at the lobby Christmas display with the pure concentration of a child choosing what to believe in. Claire leaned against Marianne's shoulder, half asleep, thumb in her mouth. The security manager spoke into a radio clipped near his collar. Daniel couldn't make out the words, only the cadence short, procedural, controlled. Within minutes, 2 uniformed hotel guards drifted toward the revolving doors, as if they were simply changing posts. A third positioned himself by the elevators, not a show, a net. Through the glass, Daniel saw the sedan again, this time not passing, but pausing at the curb beyond the valet line, just far enough to look accidental. Its headlights stayed on. No one got out. A valet glanced at it, then looked away. That was the point. In the Cold War, the cleanest threats didn't demand attention. Daniel leaned toward Marianne. "Do you see anyone?" She didn't answer at first. Her gaze tracked the entrance, the reflection of the lobby lights on the glass, the movement of people crossing in both directions. Then she whispered, barely audible, "They want us to step outside." "Why?" Daniel asked, and hated how small the word sounded. Marianne swallowed. "Because then, it's theirs again." The muff is Reed. A phone rang at the front desk. A clerk answered, listened, and his eyes flicked to Daniel for a fraction too long. The security manager returned, face neutral. "Someone just called," he said softly. "Said there was an urgent message for you. Wouldn't identify themselves, wouldn't leave a number." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "What did they say?" The man hesitated just enough to confirm it mattered. "They said, 'Tell Mr. Harper he missed his appointment.'" Harper. Not Hale. Not their real name because they had it wrong, or because they wanted him to know they were close enough to get it almost right. A needle slipped under the skin. Marianne's breath caught. "They're testing what you'll correct," she whispered. "They want you to react." Daniel stared at the sedan, the bright eyes of it pinned to the entrance, like a predator pretending to be a parked car. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to run, to do something decisive, but he remembered the note in the mailbox. "Stop making noise." He understood now. Noise was the only thing keeping his family alive. The security manager crouched slightly, bringing his voice down. Daniel shook his head once. "Not local," he said, surprising himself with the certainty. "If there's a federal channel, I need someone who won't write this down in a logbook." The birdie Divon. The security manager studied him, then nodded like he'd just been handed a code phrase he didn't fully understand, but recognized as real. He lifted his radio again, turned slightly away, and spoke a different cadence, more careful, more formal. Outside, the sedan's engine note changed subtle, like a throat clearing, and Daniel realized they weren't waiting for him to make a mistake. They were waiting for him to follow the script. The trap sprang without them. Thursday night, 6:40 sharp. The ice rink across town, filled with the soft chaos of winter kids in rental skates wobbling under string lights, parents clutching paper cups of coffee, the loudspeaker coughing out tinny holiday music. On the upper level, near the vending machines, a man in a dark overcoat stood too still to be waiting for anyone. He kept his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the entrance, scanning faces the way a clerk scans bills for counterfeit ink. At 6:52, a teenage couple drifted past the benches. The girl set a small shopping bag beside a trash bin, like she'd forgotten it. The boy didn't look back. They didn't hurry. It was casual enough to be invisible until the overcoat man moved. He stepped in, scooped the bag, and pivoted toward the side exit. No family passed him. No stroller blocked the view. No child spilled a drink in the perfect moment to break line of sight. His movement, stripped of its cover, looked like what it was, an exchange. Across the street, a plain sedan eased out of a parking space and fell in behind him the second he reached the curb. Back at the hotel, Daniel didn't learn any of that in real time. He learned it in fragments, through the security manager's tight face, through a brief, clipped conversation held behind the desk, through the sudden way two men in conservative coats entered the lobby and became part of it without ever introducing themselves to the room. They didn't flash badges. They didn't say FBI. They didn't even say their names to Daniel in front of Marianne and the kids. They only asked him to step 3 feet to the side, into the shadow near a pillar, where the Christmas tree lights couldn't reflect off their eyes. "You did the right thing," the taller man said. His voice was flat, professional, not comforting. "They needed your family to be the curtain. You took the curtain away." Daniel swallowed. "So, it was real. It was organized," the man corrected. "And now it's visible." The shorter man glanced toward the revolving doors. "You're going to get followed when you leave," he said, like he was predicting weather. "Not because they want a conversation, because they want to restore control." Marianne's face tightened, the exhaustion in her eyes turning sharp. Daniel felt the old instinct, the desire to be quiet, to be agreeable, to keep his head down, rise up like a reflex from childhood. He killed it. When they finally left, they didn't take back roads. Daniel drove straight into the bright spine of the city, into streets where people would notice, where a car that pressed too close would have to risk witnesses. He saw the tail the moment they cleared the hotel's valet lane. A dark sedan, different from the one before, keeping distance with practiced patience. It didn't chase. It steered. A light tap of brakes, a lane change, a suggestion, not a command, until Daniel felt the pressure of it tightening, guiding him toward a quieter turn. He didn't fight it with speed. He fought it with shame-proof noise. At the next intersection, he cut hard, not toward home, not toward the highway, but toward the red-lit bay doors of a fire station. He laid on the horn until a firefighter stepped out, confused, then alert. Daniel stopped directly under the floodlights. Doors locked, kids crying, Marianne clutching Eddie like he might vanish through the glass. The sedan hesitated at the corner, its headlights lingering 1 second too long. Then it rolled away, swallowed by traffic. The next morning, the phone rang once. Daniel answered, a man's voice, calm and clipped. "Mr. Harper, Daniel Harper, this call did not happen. You will not discuss last night. Your family is safe because you made it public. Keep it that way." Click. No congratulations, no headline, no victory parade. Just an ordinary family eating breakfast with the TV murmuring in the background, alive in a country where the most violent battles sometimes ended with nothing more dramatic than a dial tone and a silence that meant someone, somewhere, had lost the privilege of being invisible.